Hello, and welcome to Library Lab Notes, the show that provides insight into all things information literacy in the sciences. I'm your host, Virginia,
And I'm your host, Eric.
and today we're going to talk about open science.
We'll discuss what it is and provide an out of this world example of open science in practice. We recently discussed open educational resources and the value they have for teaching and learning, and especially for students' budgets. Open science has some relationship to this as well, but is a whole other situation worth talking about. So that's why we're bringing this to you today.
Definitely. Okay, so what is open science? Is this like running a lab outside where everyone is watching, out in the open, so to speak?
Well, in a way, sort of, but not exactly really. Open science is a movement to make science, everything from scientific research to its data and publication, available to the public, to everyone. This is to make it not just more transparent, showcasing, for example, how the actual data backs up the claims of a project, but because people could look at the data itself and see how researchers come to their conclusions. Or it can simply make a research article freely available online.
Right. So if the data used in the study is available for others to look at, they could see more about the study itself. They could even combine that data with other relational data to draw more conclusions.
Exactly. There are so many collaboration possibilities. Beyond transparency, it can actually advance science as people may see different outcomes in the same set of data, or, as you said, combine it with more data. So, if we suddenly find ourselves in the midst of a fungal based pandemic in which cordyceps are turning us into zombies, and someone released research showing how to stop cordyceps from colonizing human bodies, people could access it and maybe come together to stop a potential apocalypse.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Especially one that is featured in Edmonton. I think we know we're talking about The Last of Us.
To be completely transparent, I am one of the many viewers of that television show who immediately searched up whether or not cordyceps could actually infect human beings. And beyond that transparency and increasing collaboration, open science is also about equity, about increasing access to science globally. In an article by Shamila Nair Badul, Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, UNESCO, she states, the collaboration and inclusive characteristics of open science allow new social actors to engage in the scientific process, thus contributing to the democratization of knowledge, fighting misinformation and disinformation, addressing systematic inequalities, and guiding scientific work towards solving problems of social importance.
Yes, let's get more people involved in science and keep misinformation and disinformation away for good.
Absolutely. And what's the point of coming up with solutions for things like global warming or treatment for illnesses and putting them behind a paywall for the vast majority of people? We're actually not solving anything that way. Although I know it's not quite that simple. Publishing in academia, as we've mentioned in previous episodes, is a tricky thing.
Yes, yes, it is. Well, in case this isn't making any sense, next up, we'll do a deep dive into the fun examples of open science.
With cordyceps being the fungus du jour due to The Last of Us, I thought I'd share some interesting tidbits about cordyceps mushroom cultivation. Cordyceps have been cultivated in China and other Asian countries for years, as the dried, ground-up, finger-like fruiting bodies are purported to have medicinal properties. And the science is still out on this one, so I'm not going to elaborate on this aspect. In recent years, as these purported benefits and small-scale mushroom farming have become more popularized in the West, various growing techniques have been shared between the citizen scientists of the mushroom farming community. Now, in a nutshell, most mushrooms are grown by introducing mushroom spawn to a plant-based substrate. And there are tons of different recipes for substrates, so let's not go down that rabbit hole. This is basically true for cordyceps as well. However, given the cordyceps' parasitic nature, and that it literally takes over the bodies of host insects and eats them from within, growers must mimic the nutrition found in an insect body. Now, some farmers will simply add desiccated insect bodies to their substrate, but others will use more elaborate substrate recipes that might include ingredients like baby food, nutritional yeast, egg yolks, and/or minerals like azomite, as well as other ingredients to mimic this nutritional profile. And now that you know way more about cordyceps cultivation than you ever thought you wanted to know, back to the show.
Now it's time to talk about extraterrestrials and NASA.
Of course, how could we not when talking about open science? It's obvious.
Clearly. But in case it's not obvious to all, as I suspect it is not, this is coming from some drama associated with an article by Dr. Felice Wolf-Simon, a NASA astrobiologist research fellow at the time, and her team. The article in question was published in 2010 and is called A Bacterium That Can Grow by Using Arsenic Instead of Phosphorus. It's a good example of open science in practice, so we want to share it with you.
And aliens. It's also an example of aliens in practice.
And before we get into it, we apologize in advance in the event that we don't summarize some of the complex science here exactly right. Bear with us.
For astute listeners, Virginia was forced to lose her headphones after aliens began to tap our communications.
So the article we're going to talk about today was originally published in the periodical Science, or Science magazine, and basically claimed to have found that this bacterium, called GFAJ1, was able to live and thrive on arsenic instead of phosphorus.
Wait, doesn't arsenic smell like garlic when it's heating up? Kind of sounds delicious. Not that you should eat arsenic. Definitely don't do that. That probably would be bad.
Very bad. This finding would be a big deal because phosphorus is known for being essential for life on our planet. Denise Overby wrote about this in their New York Times article, Poisoned Debate Encircles a Microbes Study Result.
Wow, that is an article title.
I know, right? So good. They explained a bit more about the research, stating, seeking evidence that life could follow a different biochemical path than what is normally assumed, Dr. Wolf-Simon grew them in arsenic-rich and phosphorus-free environment. Reporting in the paper and a NASA news conference on December 2nd that the bacterium strain GFAJ1 of the Hanamodiaceae family of gamma probacteria had substituted arsenic for phosphorus in many important molecules in its body, including DNA.
Okay. Interesting. That clarifies a bit more.
Yes. So the authors are saying that the arsenic-grown cells don't contain enough phosphorus to support life, yet somehow they did support life, and that arsenic is being incorporated into the DNA of a living organism in some way, which therefore suggests that there are other types of living things.
Aliens.
Shh. To be fair, this whole extraterrestrial business came from NASA. The principal investigator was a NASA astrobiology research fellow, so NASA produced the following press release. We will hold a news conference at 2 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, December 2nd, to discuss an astrobiology finding that will impact the search for the evidence of extraterrestrial life. Astrobiology is the study of origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you to the Wayback Machine for capturing this. We love the Wayback Machine. Okay, so they say this because they essentially discovered a living organism that is living in a way that is alien to all other living organisms as we know it on planet Earth.
Exactly, but...
Right. Unfortunately, I actually was deeply in love with this finding when it came out, so something is off here as much as I don't want it to be.
True. The paper and NASA was heavily critiqued. Firstly, as many people pointed out, to say that any of the findings might mean there is evidence of extraterrestrial life is a stretch. Just in general, that's quite a claim. They really just found an interesting anomaly. A microbiologist at the University of British Columbia, Dr. Rosie Redfield, reviewed the paper on her blog, RR Research. We've linked it in our show notes. She noted that there were sizable errors, one being that they didn't properly wash the bug used for the DNA. The DNA preps before it was tested for arsenic.
So it could have been contaminated, skewing the results and making any findings useless. Woof.
Exactly. She also breaks down the whole science of it, essentially recreating the study to showcase all the flaws. She ended her blog article by highlighting all the things that could have been done better. It's pretty incredible. The kicker is that NASA refused to respond to Dr. Redfield and many other scientists' critiques, citing that it didn't need to respond to bloggers, ignoring the fact that these scientists presenting real science freely to others. It just happened to be done through a blog.
Yeah, that feels like such a lazy dig. Even if the critiques weren't from vetted scientists, the claims could still be sound and would be obvious to scientists reading it, like those at NASA. But that's also another example of how blogs can be a good source of information if you look at the author and what they're saying. If they're citing sources, backing up claims with sound facts, etc. Dr. Redfield is so obviously an example of a credible source on this topic.
Unquestionably. At the end of the day, even Dr. Wolf Simon, who led the research at the NASA Astrobiology Research Fellow, said in a press release that she and her co-authors have been concerned that some conclusions have been drawn based on claims not made in her paper.
Whoa, very interesting.
Yes. According to one article I read, Dr. Redfield and Dr. Wolf Simon did end this exchange on good terms, ultimately supporting each other as women in science, which I think is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And it's clear who the problem really was, as it sounds like some of the research was muddled by a certain, shall we say, high-profile group who wanted press attention, allegedly.
I agree. And ultimately, this shows the power of open science. Science Magazine made this paper publicly available to encourage the debate. Being able to look at the research itself rather than just the press release allowed the public to see if the claims were real and backed by science, or if maybe errors occurred. Dr. Redfield and her blog is another good example of sharing science openly.
It's also just a good example of how science works in some ways. Science is all about having conversations, about new discoveries being debated and retested for validity. It's such a misconception that you conduct a scientific experiment, get a result, and then that result becomes a fact. Often, you have to test and retest. As Dr. Wolf Simon said in a statement about this publication, scholarly discourse moves science forward.
That's such a good point. It shows us how bias can creep in from funders to manipulate research outputs, unfortunately. However, I suspect that if you're a major organization, you might want to double check your notes, double check your science before making a statement about the potential for extraterrestrial life. Because people might notice, just a little bit.
You'd think. And while I am somewhat devastated that there were no obvious extraterrestrials actually a part of this, I am glad that scientific debate is alive and well.
Me too. Thanks for listening, and a special thanks to our production team, Aaron and Jessica. We hope you enjoyed learning about open science. As always, you can head over to our webpage or check out all the links and resources in the show notes.
That's all for this episode, folks. See you next time.
Bye!
Do, 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 do. Oh, we can't use that sound.
That is copyright, Eric.